To all of you who have a job that requires you to enter people's apartments, what is the worst slash creepiest slash weirdest shit you have seen? I used to work for a PC repair company, and one day I got a call to head way out to the country to fix a computer. I just bought a new car the day before, so I was already irritated about having to drive down a gravel road. When I finally got to the house, no less than 4 dogs jumped up on my car, adding to my frustration. I rang the doorbell several times, but no one came to the door. Just as I was about to walk away, I heard the door creak open behind me. "Who are you?" "I'm here to look at your computer, ma'am." "Identify yourself now." "My name's How Did That Fappin'. I work for blah blah blah. You called 30 minutes ago because your PC isn't working." She reluctantly let me in. And then, with my first step inside, my senses were completely assaulted. There were at least 25 cats. Sounds great, right? Except the house was their giant litter box. Shit. Everywhere. And then, over on the couch was her 80-year-old husband, barely alive, lying there in nothing but tidy whities. She told me to ignore him, which was impossible because he legit looked like a corpse. She finally led me into the computer room. By this point, I didn't care about stepping in cat poop because my shoes were already completely covered in it. Honestly, navigating their house without getting some on you was impossible. Did I mention the lady was also covered in it? Her clothes, her hair, you name it. I moved the computer desk to get started, and, of course, the issue was simple. The computer was just unplugged. I swear that was it. I plugged it back in and got out of there as fast as I could. I left my shoes in their driveway. They were beyond saving at that point. I honestly gag every time I think about that day. 2 years ago, I worked a job doing crime scene and untimely death cleanup. We came across some pretty grim stuff, but the worst by far was an eviction cleanup. Miraculously, no one had died, but it was worse than any situation I'd dealt with. Even worse than when I once found myself holding a chunk of gray matter in my hand. The former tenant was a heroin addict, a hoarder, and had Hep C. Our task was to clear out the apartment. When we arrived, we were met with a nightmare. Not only had he hoarded trash, piles of clothing, and miscellaneous junk, but also used needles. They were scattered everywhere, hidden in every nook and cranny, mixed in with the rest of the mess. Since he was Hep C positive, we had to wear full protective gear to carefully sift through everything, separating it piece by piece. It took us 42 man-hours to finish the job. In the process, we found diaries, phone numbers, hidden stashes, you name it. One thing that stood out was the lazy boy chair in the living room, which was completely soaked in blood on the right side, likely where he shot up. Thankfully, none of us were pricked during the cleanup, and we managed to restore the apartment. If you're curious about any of the details, I've got an AMA about this if you want to know more. A few years back, I worked for a local carpet cleaning company, scrubbing apartments and houses to pay the bills. One summer day, we got a call to clean a rented house after the tenants had moved out. The landlord told us the door would be unlocked. Just go on in. No one's there. Perfect, I thought. No furniture to move, no tenants hovering over us. Easy job. My partner and I rolled up, pushed open the door, and were immediately hit by a wall of stench, thick, rancid wrong. But it was Iowa in July, and heat does weird things to empty houses. We shrugged it off, strapped on our respirators, and got to work. I was pre-treating the carpets, checking each room for spots that needed extra attention. When I cracked open a closet door, my stomach dropped. There, on the floor, was a goat's head. Not just any goat's head, maggot-riddled, rotting, the skin sloughing off like wet paper. The smell exploded outward, punching through my respirator like it was nothing. I stumbled back, nearly falling, then bolted for the front door. My partner barely had time to say, "What the hell's wrong with?" before I was outside, gulping down clean air. 2 seconds later, he crashed out beside me, face white as bone. We didn't finish the job. To this day, I have no idea why it was there. A prank? A ritual? Just some sick bastard's idea of fun? All I know is this: never trust an unlocked door. As a paramedic, I've crawled into places that would make most people vomit on sight. Rotting trash, bug-infested mattresses, homes where the air itself feels toxic. But nothing could have prepared me for that trailer. The cops standing outside didn't even try to warn me, just smirked and said, "Be prepared." I stepped inside, and the smell hit me first: iron, feces, and something sour. Then I saw it. Blood streaked up the walls. Guts smeared across the floor. Chicken feathers clinging to every surface like some grotesque snow globe. And in the middle of it all, wild-eyed, breathing hard, hands still dripping. He looked at me like I was the one who didn't belong there. "What the hell happened?" I asked, already reaching for my radio. Showing my kids where food comes from, he said, eerily calm. Turns out he'd stopped taking his meds. Decided to teach his children a lesson by ripping the heads off their pet chickens. Right in front of them. The rest was a blur. Sedating him. Wiping feathers off my boots. Listening to his ragged breathing in the ambulance, wondering if that unhinged stare would ever fade. And the whole time, one thought gnawed at me. Some people aren't just sick. They're a live wire in a room full of gasoline. I once had to install a computer at a house, and looking back, I should have known from the start that it was going to be a nightmare. The directions I got led me straight to a condemned house. I called the customer and told her that the only house at the address was condemned, and she casually said, "Oh yeah, that's my house. It's just a little messy." I'm not sure why I didn't turn around right then, but I pushed on. The lawn. It was covered in what seemed like endless piles of junk. No grass, just heaps of garbage stacked high, like feet and feet of it. I had to climb over it with a computer just to get to the porch, which was collapsing and barely held up by moldy mattresses. Inside, the smell hit me like a wall. It was a mix of puke, onions, body odor, and something else I didn't want to identify. Breathing was a struggle. The place was packed floor to ceiling with garbage, and there was a tiny little path carved through it just to get to the kitchen. The kitchen, at least there was a little more space to walk, but not by much. Candles were lit all around the room, illuminating piles of plates with moldy food, maggots, and insects crawling everywhere. The stench was unbearable. The lady explained, "Oh, it's just a little messy because someone in the family died recently." Well, I guess the body was still buried somewhere under all that trash because the smell made it clear they hadn't found it yet. At that point, I just dropped off the computer and left as quickly as possible. I told her I couldn't set it up because they didn't have a proper outlet. They really didn't. There were just 3 wires sticking out of the wall, and I wasn't about to touch that. The smell was so bad that I drove straight to a Sheetz gas station afterward and threw up repeatedly in their bathroom. I then stripped down to my boxers, threw my clothes away, and drove home to shower multiple times before going back to work. Even after all that, I could still smell it for a day, and it lingered in the work vehicle for weeks. You know the show Hoarders? I've seen every episode, and I swear not one of those houses came close to what I walked into that day. Oh, and there was this other job at a house with a toothless, mullet-wearing lady who had a pet boa constrictor that she didn't warn me about. I was on the ground under her desk, hooking up wires, when I looked up and saw this massive snake just staring at me. Naturally, I freaked out, but I had to do something, so I picked it up. It was so heavy, and shoved it into a closet until I was done setting up her computer. When she found out, she chased me out of the house, furious that I dared touch her snake. I didn't really care. I was just happy to get out of there without getting bitten. I had to crawl under this woman's duplex to run a wire, and right away, I knew things weren't going to be good. In her living room, she had 4 dogs crammed into a cage that was literally nailed to the floor. And if that wasn't bad enough, under the floor in the same spot, there were stalactites formed from years of the dogs peeing in the same spot. It was like a horror show down there. Another time, we went to this woman's house, and as soon as we pulled into the driveway, the smell hit us. It was awful. We tried the front door, but it was blocked by used diapers, so we were told to go around back. We had to navigate through piles of garbage to get there. When we finally made it inside, we found her husband had taken apart the computer in the bathtub, and most of his tools were rusted together, sitting in the sink. And no joke, there was something growing out of the toilet, spilling onto the floor of the bathroom. It was like a scene from a horror movie. Garbage was everywhere. What made it even worse was that the woman had a baby in that house. She kept talking about how happy she was that the state had given her baby back. I honestly didn't know what to say. I felt uncomfortable on so many levels. It was just a lot to take in. This one was scary, gross, and heartbreaking all at once. I was working as a contractor for the local electric/utility company, installing energy-efficient light bulbs and plumbing fixtures in apartments. The landlords would schedule the appointments, but often wouldn't even bother to let the tenants know we were coming. One day, my partner and I rolled up to a duplex for an appointment. It was in a nice area, but the place was an absolute disaster. The grass hadn't been cut all year, old appliances were strewn all over the yard. It was a total mess. The unit we were scheduled to work in was upstairs. We walked up to the porch, and from inside, we could hear death metal music blaring. This was probably around noon. We knocked on the door. No answer. After a few minutes, we called the landlord, who said he'd come let us in. He showed up, unlocked the door, and said, "It's all yours," before leaving. As we slowly walked up the stairs, the music got louder and louder, practically vibrating the walls. We entered what felt like a set for a Breaking Bad type meth head's apartment. I never actually saw any drugs, but it was filthy beyond belief, and I've seen some pretty bad places. Every dish they ever owned was encrusted with mold and grime, sitting in a sink filled with water that looked like it belonged in a power plant. The counters and tables were buried in more dishes, and there were flies everywhere. Clothes, garbage, and rotting food were scattered across every floor. Kitchen, pantry, bathroom, you name it. We called out, "Hello," but got no response. Then we turned to our right and saw 3 skinny, fully tattooed dudes with shaved heads and no shirts, completely passed out on a futon in the living room, with death metal still blasting in the background. I turned to my left and I saw movement. At first, I thought it was a dog or a cat. But as I stepped closer into the bedroom to get a better look, I froze. It was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 4 years old. She had long, straight brown hair and was wearing a full-length dress. She was a pretty little thing, and when she caught my eye, she'd shyly smile and hide, almost like she was playing hide and seek. My heart just sank. She was in a room completely filled with garbage. Not a single square inch of the floor was clear. She was playing in a corner next to an overturned mattress with a few scattered toys nearby. I wanted to cry and throw up at the same time. I tried talking to her, but the music was so loud, it was hard to communicate. And honestly, I didn't even know what to say. My partner, who hadn't noticed her at first, immediately saw the guys on the futon and muttered, "Damn this," and went straight back outside. I stayed and finished my job, replacing light bulbs, installing a shower head, while trying to hold it together. The smell was unbearable, and I had to be quiet, not wanting to wake up those potentially dangerous, passed out guys on the futon. But the whole time, I just kept thinking about that poor little girl. She didn't deserve to be in that place, surrounded by filth and neglect. That night, I called social services. I don't know if anything came of it, but I really hope it did. I used to work as a real estate appraiser, and let me tell you, I've seen some seriously messed up stuff. But the worst one, by far, was this one house I had to appraise. It was a vacant, foreclosed property, and when I went down to the basement, I found a guy lying flat on his back. He was, well, let's just say he was a little charred. Turns out, he had tried to steal the electrical wiring, probably to add to his stash of copper plumbing, but the electricity was still on. It didn't end well for him. I'll never forget the smell. It's the kind of thing that sticks with you forever. My dad's an electrician, and a while back, he had a job testing the wiring in some council properties. He walked into one flat, and it was immediately clear the tenants had a bit of a pet problem. Cats, dogs, birds, literally animals everywhere. While he was checking a socket in the living room, a tortoise casually emerged from under the sofa and just strolled right past him like it owned the place. When he asked the tenants about it, they nonchalantly told him they'd forgotten they even had the tortoise. Back when I was working as a painter, I walked into an apartment that instantly made me gag from the smell. The deeper I went in, the worse it got. This overwhelming stench of stale cigarettes, urine, and feces just hanging in the air. It was suffocating. Turns out, the woman living there had a young son, maybe around 5, who was mentally challenged. From the looks of it, she didn't make much of an effort to care for him. The poor kid had basically turned every surface in the apartment into a toilet. Floors, furniture, walls. Nothing was spared. I tried to tough it out, but after just a few minutes, the nausea was too much. I had to get out of there before I lost it. Years ago, I worked in apartment maintenance, and over time I saw my fair share of weird stuff, but nothing topped this one. I got a work order for a jammed garbage disposal. Seemed simple enough. I knocked on the door. No answer. Standard procedure in those cases was to enter if we had a key, so I let myself in. Right away, something felt off. Every window in the place was covered in aluminum foil, and the only light came from a bunch of tangled strands of Christmas lights. The smell hit me next, just this heavy, rotting odor that hung in the air. I made my way to the light switch and finally saw what was going on. The entire dining and living room area was strung with wires, and hanging from them were dozens of clothes hangers, with strips of meat dangling from each one. No joke, it looked like a scene out of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I backed out immediately. That kind of horror movie vibe was way above my pay grade. I never met the tenants, but from what I'd heard, they were possibly from the Middle East and might have been aging meat in some traditional way. Still, walking into it blind like that, absolutely freaky. Pretty sure their garbage disposal is still jammed. I work as a contractor under Home Depot, and part of my job involves going to people's homes to measure their bathrooms or basements for renovations. One day, I went to visit this sweet older couple who wanted both of their bathrooms redone. The upstairs bathroom was a quick job, simple measurements, in and out. Then I headed down to the basement to check out the second one. That's when I walked straight into a full-blown grow-op. These elderly folks were growing weed right there in their basement. Lights, plants, the whole setup. I was completely caught off guard and didn't know what to say. I just kind of stood there in stunned silence. The old lady noticed my expression, gave me a little smile, and casually asked if I wanted some. Honestly, I still don't know what was more surprising, the grow op or how chill she was about it. My electrician recounted an unusual experience during a service call. He was dispatched to a house to repair the lights in a specific room. Upon arrival, the homeowner, a middle-aged woman, directed him upstairs, indicating the first room on the left. As he ascended the stairs, he noticed a dim red light emanating from the room, which he found odd. He proceeded to open the door, at which point the homeowner exclaimed, "Not that room." He opened the door briefly and saw a naked young woman sitting on top of a man, who was evidently the homeowner's client. It became clear that he had inadvertently entered a brothel. I later learned from friends that the house was a known brothel in the area, and the previous owners have since moved out. The current residents have placed a large sign on the front door stating, "This is no longer a brothel. Please do not knock, seeking sexual services." I feel for them, as they must be constantly disturbed by people arriving at all hours. I was working with an engineering firm when we got a complaint from a woman about severe moisture and water buildup in her apartment. We checked with the other tenants around her, and no one else had any issues, so we went to investigate. The second she opened the door, we were hit with a wall of humidity, like standing in Vietnam during monsoon season. It was unbearably hot and insanely humid. After walking just a few feet inside, you were already drenched in sweat. As we started looking around, we noticed her carpet was completely soaked, just a constant squish, squish, squish with every step. When I got to the sliding glass doors leading to the patio, I couldn't believe my eyes. There were mushrooms 2 feet tall, growing right out of her carpet. The water had leaked from the doors, built up on the floor, and created this 10-foot by 10-foot mushroom garden in the middle of her living room. The source of all the moisture became clear when I opened her closet. She'd secretly had her son sneak in a washer and dryer one night and install them in there, with no plumbing for the washer and absolutely no ventilation for the dryer. All the steam and humidity from the appliances had nowhere to go, so it just stayed trapped in the apartment, causing the mess. I used to be a case manager for adults with developmental disabilities. One of my clients had a moderate to severe cognitive disability and lived independently in his own apartment. One day, I stopped by to check on him, but when I knocked on the door, a stranger answered. The man looked disheveled, homeless, possibly on drugs, and immediately started rambling about my job, money, and banks. I could see my client laying on the couch, motionless and quiet. It was clear something was off, but I couldn't figure out what was happening. I tried to keep calm and talk to the man, but after about 10 minutes, I heard someone coming in through the back door. The man I'd been speaking to quickly went into the bedroom, and I could hear him arguing with the person who just entered. A moment later, he came back out and tried to brush it off, claiming it was just the TV making noise, right as the other guy walked out of the bedroom behind him. That's when they started asking me for a ride to the bank. At that point, I knew things were about to go south, so I quickly told them I couldn't help and that my client should call me at the office. I immediately called the building's front desk to report what was going on and then call the police. The next day, they took my client to an ATM and robbed him at gunpoint, despite everything I had tried to do to protect him without putting myself at risk. Over the next several months, I helped my client move, get his finances back in order, and recover from the trauma. It was a long, difficult process, but I was glad I could help him get out of that situation. I've been working with a general contractor during summer since I was 15, and some of the places we've worked on have been, let's just say, in pretty rough neighborhoods. I've had my fair share of wild experiences, but here are the two that stand out the most. The first one happened when I was installing a new shower in a teacher's house. She seemed pretty normal at first, except for the fact that she had 15 cats running around. I was upstairs working when suddenly I hear a loud crash and a man yelling, "Get on the ground!" I peeked out the bathroom door and saw about 15 SWAT team members storming the house. Within seconds, I had a gun pointed at my head and was ordered to lay flat on the floor, hand behind my head. I was completely freaking out, but did as I was told. After a few moments, they let me up, and I was told that her husband had some kind of government job and had gotten into serious trouble. I tried to get more details, but to this day, I have no idea what he did. I've never been so shaken up at work before. The second story is even more unsettling. I was painting a house with two other guys my age, and this house looked like it hadn't been touched since the 1970s. The kids' bedrooms looked frozen in time. Old toys, books, beds, drawings all left there like nobody had touched them for decades. The medicine cabinets were full of old Band-Aids, medications, and lotions from that era. It was creepy, but not as creepy as what happened later. After we finished up for the day, I went down to the basement to rinse out my brushes, and it was a total hoarder's nightmare, packed with junk. While I was there, I heard a strange, squeaking noise coming from the far corner. I went over to investigate and found a giant freezer hidden behind a bunch of boxes. It was locked, and there were over 30 bottles of bleach around it. I didn't know what to make of it, so I ran upstairs to tell the other guys. They brushed it off, telling me I was being paranoid. That night, I went home and Googled the guy's name, but didn't find anything suspicious. The next morning, I told my boss about it, and he decided to check it out. He called the police, and by the time I got to work, the cops were leaving. It turned out that the freezer contained the wife's head. The man's kids had died in a car accident years ago, and his wife had been left a vegetable. He'd been taking care of her until she passed away, and then he went completely off the deep end. He decapitated her and froze her head. My boss later told me that the car accident had happened in the late 70s or early 80s. The wife had been brain dead, and the man didn't want to let her go. After decades of living with that trauma and his isolation, he snapped. As for me, I didn't snoop around for fun. We were painting the entire house, and I had to open the medicine cabinets to paint around them properly. I went to check out the noise in the basement because it was squeaking and rattling, which seemed unusual. I figured it could be something that we could fix, or maybe something interesting. Plus, the house had such a creepy vibe that I couldn't ignore it. Now, looking back, I can only guess that the bleach was either used for cleaning up blood from the decapitation, or maybe it was just another hoarded item. I hope this clears up some of the questions people had. It's been a while, and I'm still processing all of it. I was working maintenance at an apartment complex one blistering hot July day when we got an unusual call. A resident reported white worms coming out from under their bathtub. I grabbed the keys and rushed over, half expecting something bizarre. Sure enough, when I got there, it wasn't worms, it was maggots. I radioed my manager and told him what I'd found. Two thoughts crossed my mind. Was someone buried under the bathtub, or was this a sewage backup issue? It was hot, like sweltering hot, and the hallways were open air, so I knew the smell would be unbearable if this was something serious. I decided to call the neighbor to let them know I might need to enter their apartment since the walls between the units were connected. After that, I grabbed my carpet knife to remove the caulking around the tub and made my way over. I parked behind the building to avoid taking up any spots, and as I walked past the neighboring apartment, I caught a whiff of something foul. I tried to push the thought out of my mind, convincing myself that I'd find a logical explanation for the smell. I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked a few more times and then shouted, "Maintenance entering the apartment." When I opened the door, I was hit with a wave of flies. And I mean a wave. It was like walking into a TV with a snowy channel. The smell was overwhelming. I immediately pull my shirt over my nose and radio my boss to come take a look. As we walked into the apartment, we saw a faux ceiling beam that separated the living room and dining area. There was a hole punched through it, and drywall chunks were scattered all over the floor. We moved further in, and that's when I saw him. A man had punctured a hole above his door frame, tied a telephone cord and the sash of his robe around it, and then used it to hang himself. His neck had stretched so much that his head was hanging lower than his chest, and his body was a translucent green. The sight was so horrifying that I immediately threw up and ran outside, terrified and shaking. I called the office and 911, my hand still trembling. I couldn't shake the image from my mind. I later found out that he had been dead for around 3 weeks. With all the electricity switched off, he had been literally baking in there. What really stuck with me as I thought about it more in the following days was the ashtray underneath his chair, filled with hundreds of cigarette butts. The fact that he tried to do this in his living room and failed, only to try again, made it all the more tragic. I'm an insurance salesman working in Detroit, so I've seen my fair share of awful places, hoarders, people so poor they can't afford cleaning supplies, you name it. But there's one story that sticks with me more than all the others. I was visiting this woman's apartment to go over her Medicare and Social Security benefits. She let me in, and before I even stepped into the living room, I was hit with this horrific smell, like a punch to the face. It was bad. I told myself to just power through, thinking I'd eventually get used to it. So I focused on that and followed her to the couch where we were going to sit and go over the paperwork. Now, there was this weird white residue all over the place. At first, I thought it was just dust, but I'd soon learn otherwise. As we sat down and I worked on the application, I'm practically sweating from the heat and trying to ignore the stench. It was unbearable. After about an hour, I must have looked a bit off because she finally asked, "Honey, does it smell in here?" I politely said, "Well, just a little." She seemed unfazed and said she'd be right back, disappearing down the hallway. As she left, my eyes wandered and I noticed something strange in the corner of the room. There was a bucket sitting there with a bag inside and a bunch of other bags around it. I got a closer look and realized what was going on. This was where she went to the bathroom. She hadn't been throwing the bags of waste away. She'd just been piling them up in the corner. I almost lost it right there. I felt my stomach churn. Just as I was processing what I'd found, she shuffled back into the room, carrying a yellow box with her. She looked at me and said, "We're going to want to get up for a second, sweetie." I grabbed my stuff and stood up, trying not to breathe through my nose. She then took that yellow box of what I now recognized as baking soda and threw it all over the room, like she was dusting for something. I was too stunned to keep my mouth shut and ended up muttering, "No shit," literally. I was in complete disbelief. She had been using that bucket in the corner as her bathroom, leaving the bags of waste all around her living room. And when the smell got too bad, she just threw baking soda to cover it up. I don't think I'll ever forget that moment. During most of my high school summers, I worked for a moving company. I've had a few stories from tough evictions, hoarders, criminals with no known whereabouts, but one stands out for being both bad and really sad. We got called for an eviction at an apartment, and I was with two coworkers thinking it wouldn't take long. We get there, walk inside, and are instantly hit by the worst smell, a mix of burnt everything. Turns out a father and son had lived there, and there had been some kind of fire. The apartment was a wreck, with charred belongings scattered everywhere. Our job was to try and salvage anything that was still usable and load it onto the truck. That part was tough, but manageable. What hit me hard, though, was the sad part. I recognized the son. He was a quiet kid from high school, one of those loners who probably got picked on a lot. That day, he was just sitting there in his pajamas on the couch. We asked him to move so we could take the burnt couch, and he did, but he didn't go far. He just moved out to the car and went back to sleep in there. I didn't see him at school after that day. I couldn't help but feel terrible. Here I was cleaning up the aftermath of his life in front of him. It must have been humiliating for him. Being in that situation was bad enough, but seeing someone from high school having to help clean up, I felt like I made it worse. I'm a face painter, and I travel to people's homes for birthday parties. Fortunately, most of my clients are friendly, middle-class moms, so there's not much that's out of the ordinary. But the funniest thing I've encountered at one of these parties was a guinea pig city. They must have had at least 6 guinea pigs, and they had built a whole system of little houses and tunnels connecting all over the house. While I was face painting, I kept hearing these weird little squeals and whistles, and for a second I thought I was losing my mind. But it turned out it was just the guinea pigs having a blast. Honestly, it was pretty adorable. During the summers, I work for my dad's carpet care business and also help with turning over apartments for new tenants. I've seen a few things that are definitely worth sharing. One apartment I walked into was unsettling, to say the least. The place was covered in swastikas. They even had one made from refrigerator magnets and attached little pieces of wood to the ceiling fan blades to make it look like one. There were photos of the tenants, who I assumed were the ones with shaved heads at various Nazi rallies. And to top it all off, the inside of the front door was covered in the most disgusting, racist things I've ever seen, written in Sharpie. It was honestly disturbing. Then there was another apartment where the tenant got evicted. It turned out a woman had taken in every stray animal she could find. At one point, she had 9 cats and 6 dogs, and she never let them outside. Instead, she just let them do their business in the second bedroom. I could smell the place before I even got out of the van. By the time I stepped out, I was on the verge of vomiting. Thankfully, we were warned about the condition of the place, so we came prepared with the right gear. Even so, walking in was still unbearable. To this day, just thinking about it makes me gag. There was also this one apartment we had to paint. It had been rented by a heavy smoker for over 20 years. The walls were so dark from nicotine stains, especially in areas where the furniture had been. It looked like the walls had been permanently marked by the furniture's shadow. We ended up calling it the cave because of how dark and grimy it was. And finally, there was the tenant who left his couch behind when he moved out. As I was disassembling it to haul it out, I found 5 used and broken crack pipes hidden inside. Definitely not something I expected to find in the cushions. I used to work for Schwann's, and one of my customers had a situation that still sticks with me. She was wheelchair-bound, having lost both of her legs to diabetes, and her toilet had stopped working a few weeks ago. As a result, she had a bathtub full of waste, piss and shit, because she couldn't get anyone to help her out. Despite the unsanitary conditions, she was a kind woman and a good customer, but honestly, I dreaded going to her house every time. It was heartbreaking to see her stuck in that situation, but I couldn't help but feel uncomfortable with the conditions she was living in. I used to work for the gas company in Houston, and part of my job was to go into homes and apartments before and after turning on their gas. Over the course of a year and a bit, I did over 5,000 jobs, most of which were reconnects due to non-payment. Basically, people who hadn't paid their bills. So, as you can imagine, I've seen some things. Here's my best of list. Nastiest. There was this house that looked nice on the outside, but was an absolute nightmare on the inside. The resident was a middle-aged cat lady, and when I opened the door, I was instantly hit by the overpowering smell of cat urine and general decay. She had well over 40 cats, no litter boxes, and a whole lot of piss and crap all over the floor. To top it off, there were several dead cats in various stages of decomposition throughout the house. I had to hold my breath for the whole 5 minutes I was in there, but somehow I managed not to vomit. She was a sweet lady, though. Creepiest. I once went into an apartment rented by an old man, and when I walked in, I found dozens of life-size dolls of little girls scattered around. The guy was super strange, and he went on to tell me how the dolls kept him company. It was the most unsettling thing I've ever encountered. Weirdest. There was this trailer in a Mexican trailer park, and I couldn't understand a word the person was saying, but what really stood out was that they had a pet pig and a couple of chickens living inside the trailer. It didn't smell any worse than the other trailers, but it was definitely strange to see farm animals indoors like it was completely normal. Worst, the absolute worst, was a shotgun shack in Houston's 3rd Ward, the worst part of the ghetto. There were 2 kids, maybe 4 or 5 years old, wearing nothing but dirty diapers. The house was in such bad shape, it probably should have been condemned, but somehow it was still standing. The adult living there was clearly a meth addict, and it reminded me of that scene from Breaking Bad with a redheaded kid, where the guy gets his head crushed by the ATM. Just a grim situation all around. When my wife and I were in university, we worked for a large property management company, managing a medium-sized apartment complex in a somewhat sketchy neighborhood. We had a lot of unusual entering apartment experiences, but one in particular always sticks with us, and we tell people about it often. There was this really nice couple who lived there. We didn't see them much, but whenever we did, they were super friendly and seemed completely normal. One month, they gave us notice that they would be moving out. During their last month, I put a notice under their door asking if I could show the apartment. They came to me and explained that they still had some cleaning to do and asked if I could wait a few days before showing it. The apartment 1 floor above them was vacant and had the exact same layout, so I agreed to hold off. A week or so later, we rented out the upper unit, and I decided it was time to show their apartment again. I slid a notice under their door, and the next day, I noticed the corner of the notice was still sticking out from under the door. I hadn't seen the tenants in a few days, so I decided to check on the apartment. What I walked into was beyond anything I could have imagined. The smell hit me immediately. It was overpowering. The entire floor was covered in about 4 inches of wood chips and feces. In the kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, everywhere. There were cages in one room and several books about breeding guinea pigs. It was revolting. We had to completely gut the apartment, down to the studs and subfloor, to clean it. After the repairs were done, the place still smelled off. In the middle of the night, the tenants dropped off their keys at my apartment with a note that simply said, "Sorry," classic Canadian understatement. We never heard from them again. A couple of years ago, I was working as a contractor, and we received a call about a water leak coming from the ceiling. The water had been dripping for about a week, so my coworker and I went over to check it out. Sure enough, there was water dripping from the ceiling. We decided to go upstairs to the apartment above to see what was causing it, and what we found was unlike anything I'd ever seen. The apartment was small, just 3 rooms plus a kitchen, but there was a family of 8 living there. They were originally from Africa and had recently arrived in Sweden. The government had given them an apartment and a welfare check, but the situation was unique. They were new to modern living and had little understanding of how things were supposed to be done. In the living room, they had laid down about 10 square meters of soil trying to grow potatoes. And in the bathroom, instead of a sink, there were dishes piled up in the toilet. Apparently, they were using the toilet as a way to clean their dishes or possibly flush them down. It was definitely one of the most bizarre and unforgettable situations I've come across in my line of work. I used to work as a house cleaner, and let me tell you, people could be absolutely disgusting. One house we cleaned had cats that sprayed everything, including the toddlers' toys. It was like they just let the animals do their business wherever they wanted. And food, it seemed like they'd spill it on the floor and just leave it there until we came back 2 weeks later. It was honestly baffling. Then there was another house with 4 dogs that were never allowed outside. The place was a nightmare. There was always a puddle of dog urine by the back door, dog feces scattered everywhere, dirty underwear laying around, and puke in the shower. The bathtub was perpetually clogged, so we couldn't even get it properly cleaned. And on top of it all, they would complain that we weren't doing a good enough job. Oh, and let's not forget the number of homes with naked pictures hanging on the walls. It's way higher than you'd expect. It's honestly a little unsettling how often that happened. I used to work in social care, and one client really stands out. He had a strange obsession with using dildos to the point that it caused serious damage. His muscles in that area had basically stopped working from overuse. One day, I walked in to hear him shout, "I've had an accident." I rushed to his room and found him lying on his bed, and what I saw was absolutely shocking. His prolapsed condition was beyond anything I had ever seen, and there was a huge mess of feces and a strange jelly-like substance. After that, I couldn't take it anymore, and a week later, I quit. I was referred to this site by a friend who's here often, and they told me, "You've got to share your story." So, here goes. Sorry if I mess it up. I worked as a home water consultant for a small company that focused on hard water treatment in the area. Around here, the water's so bad that it can even make you more thirsty after drinking it. Some areas are worse than others, especially those up on the hills. We never did cold calls. People called us to schedule a time, and then we'd head out. Keep that in mind. One day, I get a ticket for a neighborhood I've worked in a lot. I look it up on Google Earth, and the house looks huge, big enough that I might even be able to sell one of our larger units. Excited, I drive out there, pull up to the gate, and use the call box. A gruff voice comes through and asks, "Who the hell are you?" I point to the logo on the truck and say, underscore representative. We were scheduled for 2 o'clock. Silence. Total silence. No, you're muted sound, so I know they can hear me. I wait for about a minute and finally say, "Hello, is this a bad time?" The buzzer goes off and the gate slowly opens. I drive up the long driveway, but the place is so massive that I'm not sure where to park. It's a loop with hardly any space for visitors. After a minute of circling, I finally find a spot near the fence and park, making sure there's enough room for other cars. As I get out of the truck, an older woman in a white jogging outfit comes out and says, "Don't leave it there. Please drive it there." Her English is broken, and she points at a random part of the driveway. It's just a circle, and there's no clear area to park. But she's panicked, and I figure, okay, she must know what she's doing, so I move the truck. After I get out, she walks briskly toward the gate. I notice it's still open, and I watch her walk out, but she doesn't come back. The gate stays open. I'm standing there for a few minutes, unsure of where to go next, and then I hear a woman's voice say, "Please come in." It's coming from nowhere. There's no woman around. It's like an intercom system, but it's not clear. Confused, I walk up to the main door, but the same voice comes through the air and says, "Please use the other entrance." Thank you. At this point, I'm seriously considering leaving, but the gate is now closed, so I head toward the other door. When I get there, I'm expecting someone to let me in, or maybe the door will open like the gate did. But nothing happens. I check for a doorbell or a knocker. Nothing. So I knock. I wait, but no one comes. I start getting really freaked out at this point. Where did the lady go? Where's the guy who opened the gate? I stand there, unsure what to do, but then I hear the door open. A woman is standing inside with a remote in her hand, and she motions for me to come in. As I step inside, I instinctively start to take off my shoes, but she immediately shouts, "Don't take off your shoes." It's like I'm about to set the house on fire if I take them off. But then she says calmly, "We have animals." It's okay. I'm still trying to process this when I step inside, and the place reeks of disinfectant. It's stronger than a hospital. I could have smeared hand sanitizer all over my face, and I still wouldn't have been able to smell it. The woman motions for me to sit in a living room area that's filled with armchairs covered in plastic. She watches me like a hawk as I sit down. I introduce myself, thank her for the hospitality, and go to hand her the materials I brought. But she doesn't take it from me. She just stares at it like she's afraid of it. That's when I realize they're probably germaphobes. I start my presentation, but the whole time her eyes are darting around the room, and she nods or shakes her head almost randomly. It's odd, but I keep going. Then I hear a strange static noise, and she asks where the unit would need to be installed. I tell her where and describe the setup, and she gives me this weird look. The static noise happens again. She asks how I know about the layout of the basement, so I explain that we pull data from the town's zoning authority before visits. Which isn't entirely true, but we did have access to that info. The static happens again, and she looks freaked out, asking what information I have access to. I tell her most towns have this data available, but only to certain people. That's when it hits me. The static noise is coming from an earpiece she's wearing. I barely catch a glimpse of it through her hair. And I look around the room and see a huge mirror on the wall. It's obvious now that the guy who answered the gate is probably watching me through that mirror, and she's getting instructions from him through the earpiece. At that point, I try to change the subject, wrapping up the meeting. I offer her the pricing information, and she nods, saying she'll think about it and get back to us. I leave my card on the table and practically leap out of my seat to leave. As I reach for the door handle, she yells, "I got it!" The door opens, and I quickly walk back to my truck. I wait for what feels like an eternity for the gate to open before finally driving out. Back at the office, I tell everyone about the experience, but when I mention the name of the place, no one's heard of them. This is weird because our city isn't that big, and people with a house like that usually stand out. I tell my boss I never want to go back, and if they call, I'll refer them to someone else. Fortunately, they never called. But later that night, I start getting random emails from a Gmail address with no subject, containing dozens of photos of a woman. They're ordinary photos, just her getting in her car, talking to someone outside a store, sitting at a table. At first, I didn't block the address because there was nothing obviously disturbing in the photos. But then a few days later, I get another email from the same address. It's a picture of me holding the folder while walking into the living room. It's taken from camera across from where I was sitting, and you can even see the tips of the woman's fingers as she ushered me in. I blocked the email, told my boss, and asked if I should contact the cops. He just shrugged and asked for the number I was given for that house. He told me he'd handle it. Every time I asked him about it after that, he'd change the subject and say, "Nothing to worry about." It wasn't dead cats or anything too extreme, but almost 5 years later, I still occasionally have nightmares about it. I work for a moving company that mainly helps elderly people transition from their homes to retirement communities. The first job I ever did was for a woman with stage 1 dementia. She had spent most of her life as a stay-at-home mom while her husband worked, and when her kids moved out, she began filling their old rooms with teddy bears. By the time we arrived to help her move, we discovered that she had actually insured these bears for over $150,000. It was wild. As we went through the house, sorting things out and cleaning up, I ended up filling an industrial-sized dumpster about 1.25 times with just trash. It was unbelievable. I have some photos of the place. If there's any interest, I can share them later. And if you're curious about which teddy bears can be worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars, check out the Steve and Gun brands. Those are the big names in the world of collectible bears. I work for my university, helping monitor energy use and ensuring we're cutting costs where possible. My job involves going into unoccupied housing to check for any wasteful energy usage or leaks. I've come across some pretty strange things during my rounds, but one encounter was a mix of a great win and a true horror. Let's start with the horror. I walked into an apartment and was hit with the most horrific smell you can imagine. After a quick search, I traced the smell to the refrigerator. I thought to myself, maybe they just left some food in there. That was my first mistake. I opened the fridge, and within seconds, I was overwhelmed by the worst stench ever. The fridge and freezer were packed to the brim with all kinds of food: fish, meats, veggies, fruits, milk, you name it. And to make it worse, the fridge had been unplugged for who knows how long. I thought I was going to pass out from the smell. Now for the win. I entered a room to find panties everywhere. Panties on the floor, panties on the furniture, panties all over the place. It was bizarre. Needless to say, I had to call it in to get cleaned up. I wasn't about to let any kids in camp stay in that room and get a surprise they weren't expecting. It was certainly an unforgettable day on the job. I worked as a case manager for a hoarder who also had a lung condition. It was a challenging situation, to say the least. One of the most unsettling things I came across in his living room were these little open containers. He'd cough up strange, thick phlegm into them and leave them scattered around. There were dozens of them, each at different stages of, well, let's just say some had been there for quite a while. It was a difficult environment to navigate, but I did my best to help him manage it. When my mom was just starting out on her own, living in her first place, she had an unforgettable encounter. One day, a massive spider crawled out from under the fridge. My dad was too busy to come help her, so she reluctantly decided to take care of it herself. She grabbed a shoe, slammed it down with a swift pop, and thought she'd handled the problem. But then, out of nowhere, she heard what she described as one of the most terrifying sounds I've ever heard. A constant, frantic hissing coming from all over the floor. When she looked down, she realized she'd just killed a pregnant spider, and now hundreds of baby spiders were swarming everywhere. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed her stuff, walked right out of the house, and waited for my dad to come save her. Classic mom move, honestly. I used to live across from an Asian woman who had a little boy, maybe 2 or 3 years old, with Down syndrome. The child was always clean, well cared for physically, but you could just feel the resentment coming off her. It was like she hated that boy with every fiber of her being. It was heartbreaking to witness. Eventually, before she moved away, the boy ended up living full-time with his dad and the dad's girlfriend. Honestly, it seemed like the best outcome for everyone involved. Still, I couldn't help but feel sorry for both of them. The boy for the lack of warmth from his mom, and the mom, who clearly was struggling in her own way. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and we will see you in the next video.